is like a wafer with a whole bunch of holes in it, and then there are thousands of that wafer with holes that are all different across there, and data moves through, and based on the data and what else is moving through there, it decides. No matter what change we see, this is how human opinion behaves on a bell curve. Now with AI, it's no different. What's unique about AI and what makes us understand that it has consequences is it has this weird thing that some change has. Some change, you see people that see both sides of the spectrum. There are people who have evangelist views, and those exact people have alarmist views at the same time. It's an expertise paradox. This is why we've all been talking about the pause of AI, where the experts were saying, hey, we should stop, even the ones that invented it. It's almost like on one side of it, you go, I wonder what it can do. And on the other side, you go, I don't know what it's going to do. This is how you know you're dealing with something consequential, no different from how we dealt with nuclear fission. So the world is kind of bifurcated. We've got Ray Kurzweil on one side that says the species is going to go through continuance. We're going to transcend to something that's more digital. We're going to transfer ourselves there. And then we have Mustafa Suleyman on the other side that says we got to contain this. This is an issue of containment. And so executives are left with kind of looking at these two voids, not knowing what to do in the middle. Massive bias for action to invest in artificial intelligence, but an insane amount of anxiety around what's going to happen. And that's because we don't understand how it works. First of all, to understand the black box problem, understand that there's a bit of a naming problem. A black box is something you're not supposed to look into and you can't look into. A neural network is not a black box. You can look into it. You're allowed to look into it. But our capacity to understand what's actually happening in a neural network, to visualize it, is very, very, very difficult. It's actually a display and visualization problem. Even if we were to plot it all in 3D and you could see all the holes in the wafer, how data moves through, we still wouldn't understand what's going on. And so because we can't process how it arrived at what it arrived at, it creates fear. I believe that if we can start to understand what is actually happening in a neural network and visualize it, we might start to realize that we're going to coexist with this thing. In order to understand it, I want you to take a look at this video. This is called a Galton's board. Anybody ever seen one of these? Where you drop these little marbles into this random set of holes and they end up kind of in a perfect bell curve every single time? Now this is one set of holes that a marble is falling through. A neural network, and I'm oversimplifying massively here, okay? A neural network is like a wafer with a whole bunch of holes in it, and then there are thousands of that wafer with holes that are all different across there, and data moves through, and based on the data and what else is moving through there, it decides which hole to go in and out, and then it comes out on the other side. And every time you run that model, it goes through a different path. And so you really can't understand what is going on. It almost looks like you're trying to figure out, if I drop this ball in a hole, what's going to happen on the other side? This is not a problem that we can't solve. This is a display and visualization problem. And I think when we solve it, it's going to go from a black box to an open cube. And then we're going to stop worrying about whether one form of intelligence is going to transform into another, or one intelligence is going to dominate the other. I think we're going to get to a point where we realize that two intelligences can coexist in harmony. And that's where I sit. Now, if we believe that the two extremes are not going to happen, and we're going to go right down the middle, then we got to start saying, so what are we going to do? Because we got to start acting. So we kind of got to size it. How big is AI? Like if software was this big, maybe electronics was that big. Maybe industry, the ability to commercialize, was about this size. Maybe education was a really big change and a big issue. Maybe the fact that we could cooperate and we had trust and we start to work together was even bigger impact in society. And then there was language, which really transformed society. We heard about that a little bit earlier today. AI is about this size. what is unique about AI and why I'm such an optimist around it is because it has something that everything that's come before it doesn't have, and that's that it has a compounding effect. It takes everything that came before it and it makes it a little better. It makes software a little better. It makes electronics a little better. It makes industry a little better. And that's not the only thing that it makes better. We now realize that if we do build automation and intelligence to the extent that we can into our systems, our societies, and our communities, it's going to take trust and turn it on its head. And we just saw in the last year that it took language and massively changed it at the same time. So in some ways, this thing is spinning. And it's taking everything that's come before it, and it's amplifying it in a completely different way. So you go, well, if it's really amplifying, how far back does it go? I think when AI is applied to the platform of biology, especially with some of the synthetic biology that we're looking at, if it goes that far, it might be as fundamental as the time that we got up from 4 on to 2. So the question is, if we have an idea about where it is and where it's pointing, and we're running a company right now, and we're trying to figure out where do we place our bets, who do we hire, what do we automate, how do we think about labor, how do we think about risk, how do we think about experiences, we got to kind of have a view of where it's going in the future. Now, there are some things that are going to change. Learning is going to change. Not just learning for children, but learning in organizations, learning as a community. How we learn is going to change fundamentally. We just went from inquiry in to information out to inspiration in and insight out. That's the difference between a Google search and a GTP prompt. Learning is going to fundamentally change in ways that we're never going to imagine. The other thing that's going to change is liability. We talked a little bit before at this conference about autonomous cars, when they decide who to kill and who not to kill. Ray mentioned the airplane this morning of the 1% of landing it in the Hudson River. IBM just came out and said, we'll indemnify you from any issues that our models create. Liability is going to change fundamentally. We may go back to the limited liability corporation that says, hey, we'll insulate you from anything that the corporation does, to some sort of other liability corporation where we have to insulate ourselves from what an AI does. So liability is going to change. Labor is going to change. What happens when my AI starts to work on behalf of me, and an AI doesn't only have to do one job. My AI could be working 100 jobs at the same time. What happens when a company automates too much jobs and becomes dominant, and it messes up with the taxation system? What happens to labor? Labor is going to change fundamentally. What we do, how we do, why we do it, how much of it we do, when we do it, all of that is going to change with artificial intelligence. Laws are going to change. We just heard conversations this morning about deep fakes and how fakes are going to work and whether you can actually litigate against that. And you know what else is going to change? This is my last L. Notice I like alliterations. Love's going to change. Whether it's because of loneliness or connection. So as you look out at this and you say, if I'm trying to really navigate an organization today and I have to build budget for next year, this is a pretty complex map to kind of navigate. And some of it, we don't know how big it's going to be. We don't know when it's going to happen. But we have an idea that this is kind of how it's going to play out. So we need a bit of a compass to be able to navigate this. On the north, I kind of popped people on the north. On the south is power. On the east is the nation state. And on the west, you guys are going to love this one, the tech state. When we're looking at how this phenomena is going to move, these are the lenses that we have to look through. And here's what's going to happen. On the northeast, we know that the nation state is eventually going to regulate AI in the interests of the people. On the Southeast, we also know that the nation state is going to participate in a geopolitical arms race. And those two things don't necessarily net out with each other in a good way, but they will happen. On the Northwest, the tech state will use artificial intelligence to significantly improve our standard of living, no question. But at the same time, the tech state is going to use artificial intelligence to significantly improve surveillance capitalism. All four of these things will be happening at the same time as we try to navigate this phenomena from the perspective of leadership. And in the moment, you also have to take in consideration of the moment. We're sitting in a half a decade to a decade period where risk is all across society. We're also seeing rates at a level that we've never seen before. As a matter of fact, something about consumer sentiment is completely changing. And last but not least, there's an arms race going on. Everything from the CHIPS Act to who's buying up chips to who's really hoarding silicon, there is a massive race going on around this. So as you think about AI and where it goes and why it goes there and what you should do about it, as we go through each of these, you have to look at them from the lens of that compass with the context of the moment at the same time. How is learning going to change in the context of people, power, tech state, nation state, within risk, interest rates, and geopolitical race? How's liability going to change? Which geographies are going to lead with more company-friendly liability policies versus others? And what's that going to mean for where capital is deployed? How's labor going to change? How are laws going to change? And you know this one's changing. So you look at this and you go, Richie, this is great. You're taking us somewhere between 220 or 200 years out. We don't know which one. But kind of give us a reason to be excited, to be scared, and slightly comfortable, but anxious at the same time. From a corporate perspective, we've been living in this world. We're in an organization. And everything that we've seen, from digital transformation to change leadership to new business models, we live in a form of organization where the propensity to win and the capacity for change feels like a zero-sum game. Those who can win don't have a good capacity for change. Those who can change don't seem to have a good capacity for winning. Where I think we're going is that organizations are going to go through a slight transition to an organism. And by the way, the two words have the same etymology. They come from the same Greek prefix. And an organism is a little bit different from an organization. It's an abundant capacity to repeatedly reinvent oneself within a set of organizing principles. If you think about the amount of optionality that's in front of us, the amount of choices that we have to make, the mechanisms by which we evaluate what's right and what's wrong, we cannot go through transformations that take 3 to 5 years. We have to be able to have a faster, short life for our changes and our decisions and our strategic oversight. We have to almost get to a state of adaptation. This is the moment we're in. This is what I think the organizational so what is for artificial intelligence. And that's how I see it.